Emma Chun had always been proud of her independence. At 28, she lived alone in a cozy apartment on the third floor of a converted Victorian house in the quiet neighborhood of Maplewood. The building had character, with its creaking wooden floors and tall windows that let in streams of golden sunlight during the day. She loved the solitude, the freedom to come and go as she pleased, and the sense of security that came from being self-reliant. Her daily routine was predictable and comforting. Every morning at 7, she would brew a cup of coffee in her small kitchen, check her emails, and prepare for another day at the local library where she worked as a research librarian. Emma had a passion for helping people find information, whether it was genealogy research for elderly patrons or academic sources for college students. Her colleagues often commented on her patience and attention to detail, qualities that made her invaluable to the library's operations. The first sign that something was different came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Emma had just returned from her weekly grocery shopping trip, arms full of paper bags containing fresh vegetables, pasta, and her favorite herbal tea. As she fumbled with her keys at the front door of the building, she noticed a figure standing across the street under a lamppost. The person was too far away to make out clearly, but something about their stillness caught her attention. They weren't walking a dog, waiting for a bus, or talking on a phone. They were simply standing there, facing her building. Emma shook off the uneasy feeling and climbed the stairs to her apartment. She spent the evening organizing her groceries, preparing a simple dinner of spaghetti with marinara sauce, and settling down with a novel she had been meaning to read. The mysterious figure across the street slipped from her mind as she became absorbed in the story. Over the next few days, Emma began to notice small things that felt out of place. Her morning newspaper, which was usually left neatly folded by her door, was sometimes positioned differently than she remembered. The delivery person had been the same for 3 years, and Emma knew his habits well. She also found that items in her apartment seemed to be moved slightly. Her favorite coffee mug, which she always placed in the same spot on the kitchen counter, would sometimes be turned a different direction. Her books, which she arranged alphabetically on her shelves, occasionally appeared out of order. Emma tried to rationalize these observations. Perhaps she was more tired than usual and not paying attention to how she left things. The stress of the upcoming holiday season at the library was considerable, with increased patron requests and special programming events to coordinate. She convinced herself that her mind was simply playing tricks on her. The feeling of being watched intensified during her evening walks. Emma had always enjoyed taking a peaceful stroll around the neighborhood after dinner. The tree-lined streets were well lit and safe, with families often visible through the warm glow of their living room windows. But, lately, she found herself glancing over her shoulder more frequently. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps that seemed to match her own pace, but when she turned around, the sidewalk behind her was empty. One evening, while walking past the small park 2 blocks from her apartment, Emma decided to test her suspicions. She stopped abruptly and pretended to tie her shoelace, listening carefully for any sounds behind her. The footsteps she thought she had been hearing stopped as well. When she stood up and continued walking, the subtle sound of footfall on concrete resumed. Emma's heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain calm and continue her usual route home. At work, Emma found it difficult to concentrate on her tasks. She made mistakes when cataloging new arrivals and had to redo several research requests for patrons. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, noticed her distraction and asked if everything was all right. Emma assured her that she was fine, just dealing with some personal stress. She didn't want to sound paranoid by mentioning her suspicions about being watched. The breakthrough came on a Friday evening when Emma decided to vary her routine. Instead of taking her usual evening walk, she went to the small coffee shop on Main Street to grade through some professional development materials. The shop had large windows that offered a clear view of the street, and Emma chose a table near the back where she could observe without being easily seen. After about 30 minutes, she spotted him. A tall man in a dark jacket was walking slowly past the coffee shop, glancing through the windows as if searching for someone. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she recognized something familiar about his posture and gait. This was the same figure she had been sensing during her evening walks. He continued past the shop, but returned about 10 minutes later, this time walking in the opposite direction and looking more carefully through the windows. Emma's hands trembled as she gathered her materials and prepared to leave through the shop's back exit. She waited until the man had moved on before quickly making her way home via a route that took her through the busier commercial district rather than the quiet residential streets she usually preferred. That night, Emma double-checked all the locks on her apartment door and windows. She also pushed her dresser in front of the door, creating an additional barrier. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by every small sound from the building's aging infrastructure. The heating system's occasional groans and the settling of wooden beams kept her alert and anxious throughout the night. The next morning brought no relief. As Emma prepared her coffee, she noticed that her kitchen window, which faced the courtyard behind the building, had what appeared to be a handprint on the outside glass near the bottom. The print was too large to be from a child and too high to have been made by someone of average height standing on the ground. Someone would have had to climb onto something to reach that position, or they would have to be quite tall. Emma's hands shook as she examined the handprint more closely. The glass was on the second floor, and there was no fire escape or balcony that would provide easy access to that window. Someone had gone to considerable effort to get close enough to leave that mark. She immediately called her landlord, Mr. Peterson, who lived on the first floor of the building. Mr. Peterson was a retired police officer who took the security of his tenants seriously. He came up to examine the handprint and agreed that it was concerning. He suggested that Emma file a police report and promised to install additional security lighting in the courtyard area. He also offered to change the locks on her apartment door, which Emma gratefully accepted. The police officer who took Emma's statement was professional but seemed skeptical about the extent of her concerns. Officer Martinez explained that unless there was evidence of actual breaking and entering or direct threats, there was limited action they could take. He suggested that Emma document any future incidents with photographs and timestamps, and advised her to vary her routines to make it more difficult for anyone to predict her movements. Emma followed this advice, but the stress of constantly being vigilant was exhausting. She began leaving work at different times each day and taking various routes home. She also started spending more time at public places like the library's branch locations or shopping centers, where she felt safer in crowds. Despite these precautions, the sense of being watched continued. Emma noticed that her mail was sometimes delivered in a slightly different order than usual, suggesting that someone might be handling it before she retrieved it from her mailbox. She also found small objects in her apartment that didn't belong to her: a pin with a logo from a business she had never visited, a hair tie that wasn't hers, and a receipt for coffee from a shop she didn't frequent. The psychological pressure began to affect Emma's work performance more seriously. She made several significant errors in research requests, including providing incorrect citation information to a graduate student working on her thesis. Mrs. Henderson called Emma into her office for a formal discussion about her declining performance and offered her the option of taking some personal leave to address whatever issues she was facing. Emma seriously considered the leave option, but she worried that staying home alone all day would only make her more vulnerable and anxious. Instead, she requested a temporary transfer to the main library downtown, where there were more staff members and higher security. Mrs. Henderson agreed to arrange this accommodation for a trial period of 1 month. The downtown library was busier and more impersonal than her usual branch, but Emma found comfort in the constant activity and the presence of security guards. She worked at a desk that was positioned so she could see the main entrances, and she felt more secure knowing that her location during the day was unpredictable. However, the feeling of being watched followed her even to the downtown location. During her lunch breaks, Emma sometimes noticed the same tall figure in dark clothing lingering near the library's entrance or in the small park across the street. She began eating lunch in the staff break room rather than venturing outside, but even this precaution didn't eliminate the sense of being observed. The situation escalated one evening when Emma arrived home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. She was certain she had locked it before leaving for work, as this had become an obsessive ritual over the past few weeks. Emma immediately called Mr. Peterson, who came upstairs with a flashlight and baseball bat to check the apartment. They found no obvious signs of disturbance inside, but Emma noticed that her bedroom window was open about 2 inches. She never left windows open during the day, especially not in late October when the weather had turned cold. Mr. Peterson examined the window and found scratches around the lock that suggested it might have been tampered with from the outside. This time, when Emma called the police, Officer Martinez took her report more seriously. The evidence of possible breaking and entering warranted a more thorough investigation. He arranged for a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and recommended that Emma stay elsewhere for a few nights while they processed the scene. Emma reluctantly accepted her sister Lisa's invitation to stay at her house in the suburbs. Lisa lived with her husband David and their 2 young children in a spacious ranch-style home with a sophisticated security system. The house felt like a fortress compared to Emma's apartment, and for the first time in weeks, she was able to sleep through the night without startling at every sound. Lisa was concerned about Emma's situation and insisted that she consider moving permanently. She offered Emma the guest room for as long as needed and suggested that they could help her find a new apartment in a different part of the city. Emma appreciated the support, but felt reluctant to completely uproot her life because of what might just be an elaborate series of coincidences. During her stay at Lisa's house, Emma received a call from Officer Martinez. The forensics team had found several clear fingerprints in her apartment, but they didn't match any records in the criminal database. This meant that whoever had been in her apartment was either very careful about avoiding detection in the past or had no prior criminal record. The officer recommended that Emma not return to the apartment alone and suggested she consider relocating permanently. The investigation expanded when Emma remembered to mention the handprint on her kitchen window. Officer Martinez arranged for the forensics team to return and collect that evidence as well. They also interviewed other tenants in the building to determine if anyone else had experienced similar incidents. Mrs. Kowalski, who lived in the apartment next to Emma's, revealed that she had noticed a tall man in the building's courtyard on several occasions over the past month. She had assumed he was a maintenance worker or perhaps someone visiting another tenant. But she admitted that his presence had seemed odd because he never appeared to be doing any actual work. Mr. Peterson was troubled to learn that someone had been accessing the building without his knowledge. He immediately arranged for a locksmith to change all the exterior locks and installed a security camera system in the courtyard and main entrance areas. He also provided all tenants with new keys and implemented a policy requiring visitors to be buzzed in rather than allowing them to access the building through the courtyard entrance. Emma felt grateful for these security improvements, but she remained hesitant to return to her apartment. The knowledge that someone had been inside her personal space was deeply unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the threat hadn't disappeared just because of better locks and cameras. The psychological impact of the stalking was becoming more apparent. Emma found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, even when she was in secure locations like Lisa's house or the downtown library. She had difficulty sleeping, even with the security system armed, and often woke up multiple times during the night to check that all the windows and doors were still locked. Lisa suggested that Emma speak with a counselor who specialized in helping victims of stalking and harassment. Emma initially resisted this idea, feeling that she should be strong enough to handle the situation on her own. However, as the anxiety began to interfere with her ability to function normally, she agreed to make an appointment. The counselor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, explained that Emma's reactions were completely normal responses to what she was experiencing. She provided Emma with strategies for managing anxiety and helped her develop a comprehensive safety plan that included varying routines, maintaining communication with trusted friends and family members, and documenting all incidents for potential legal action. Dr. Mitchell also recommended that Emma consider obtaining a restraining order once the stalker was identified, assuming the police investigation yielded results. She explained that even if the person hadn't made direct threats, the pattern of behavior Emma described could constitute criminal harassment in many jurisdictions. Emma's case gained additional attention when the security cameras at her APA 3 weeks into her stay at Lisa's house. Emma made the difficult decision to return to work at her original library branch. The downtown location had felt too impersonal, and she missed the familiar environment and supportive colleagues at the Maplewood branch. Mrs. Henderson welcomed her back with understanding and assured Emma that the entire staff would be vigilant about any unusual visitors or behavior. Dr. Mitchell had helped Emma develop coping strategies that made her feel more prepared to handle the ongoing situation. She learned breathing techniques to manage anxiety attacks and practiced mindfulness exercises that helped her stay grounded when paranoid thoughts threatened to overwhelm her. Emma also carried a small notebook where she documented anything suspicious, following Officer Martinez's advice about maintaining detailed records. The first few days back at the Maplewood Library passed without incident. Emma felt a sense of normalcy returning as she helped patrons with their research needs and caught up on cataloging projects that had accumulated during her absence. Her colleagues were supportive without being overly protective, which helped Emma feel like she was regaining some control over her life. However, the relative peace was shattered when Emma discovered that someone had been asking questions about her at the library. Mrs. Henderson approached Emma privately to inform her that a man had visited the previous week, claiming to be an old friend who wanted to surprise her. He had asked about Emma's work schedule and whether she had any regular commitments outside of work. Mrs. Henderson had followed library policy by not providing any personal information about staff members, but she was concerned because the man had been persistent and seemed overly interested in details about Emma's daily routine. The description Mrs. Henderson provided matched the general appearance of the figure Emma had been seeing: tall, dark clothing, and something unsettling about his demeanor. Emma immediately called Officer Martinez to report this new development. The fact that her stalker was now actively seeking information about her from her workplace represented a significant escalation in his behavior. Officer Martinez advised Emma to be extra cautious and suggested that she might want to consider taking extended leave until the investigation produced more concrete results. The psychological pressure was mounting, but Emma was determined not to let the stalker completely dictate her life. She worked with Dr. Mitchell to develop strategies for maintaining her daily activities while staying safe. This included arranging for colleagues to escort her to her car at the end of each workday and coordinating with Lisa to ensure that someone always knew Emma's whereabouts. Emma also began varying her routes to and from work more dramatically, sometimes taking public transportation instead of driving her own car. She purchased pepper spray and took a self-defense class at a local community center. These actions helped her feel more empowered, but they also served as constant reminders that her life had been fundamentally altered by the stalker's presence. The breakthrough in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Kowalski, the elderly neighbor who had previously mentioned seeing a tall man in the courtyard, called police to report that she had seen the same individual again. This time, however, she had been able to get a better look at him and noticed that he was carrying what appeared to be a professional camera with a long telephoto lens. Officer Martinez responded to Mrs. Kowalski's call and was able to interview her while the details were fresh in her memory. She described seeing the man positioned behind a large oak tree in the courtyard, pointing the camera toward Emma's apartment windows. When Mrs. Kowalski had opened her own window to get a better look, the man had quickly packed up his equipment and left through the back gate. This information prompted the police to expand their investigation to include possible photography or video surveillance equipment that might have been used to monitor Emma. Officer Martinez obtained a warrant to search the area around Emma's building for any hidden cameras or recording devices. The search revealed a small, battery-powered camera that had been concealed in the branches of a tree directly across from Emma's bedroom window. The device was sophisticated and appeared to have been in place for several weeks, based on the weathering and the amount of recorded footage it contained. Emma felt physically ill when Officer Martinez explained what they had found. The knowledge that someone had been recording her private activities in her own apartment was deeply violating and traumatic. She immediately agreed to Officer Martinez's suggestion that she should not return to the apartment under any circumstances until the stalker was apprehended. The forensic analysis of the camera and its memory card would take several days, but Officer Martinez was optimistic that the evidence would provide crucial leads in identifying the stalker. The device might contain fingerprints, and the recorded footage could potentially show the stalker's face clearly when he had installed or maintained the equipment. Emma struggled with feelings of violation and helplessness as she processed this new information. Dr. Mitchell helped her understand that these reactions were normal responses to such an extreme invasion of privacy. They worked on strategies for managing the trauma while maintaining Emma's sense of agency and control in other areas of her life. Lisa was outraged when she learned about the camera and insisted that Emma should consider relocating permanently to a different city. She offered to help Emma find a new job and apartment far away from the stalker's reach. Emma appreciated the support, but felt conflicted about the idea of completely starting over because of someone else's criminal behavior. The investigation gained additional resources when the case was transferred to Detective Sarah Chun, who specialized in stalking and harassment cases. Detective Chun met with Emma to conduct a more comprehensive interview about her experiences and to review all the evidence that had been collected. Detective Chun explained that the stalker's behavior showed signs of escalation that were concerning from a safety perspective. The progression from simple observation to breaking into Emma's apartment to installing surveillance equipment suggested that the stalker was becoming bolder and more invested in maintaining contact with Emma. Emma learned that Detective Chun had handled similar cases where stalkers eventually progressed to direct confrontation or attempted kidnapping. This information was terrifying, but Emma found some comfort in knowing that her case was now being handled by someone with specific expertise in this type of crime. The analysis of the camera footage revealed several important clues. The stalker had indeed captured weeks of recordings showing Emma's activities in her apartment. More significantly, the footage included several clips of the stalker himself, apparently checking the camera's position or adjusting its settings. His face was clearly visible in several frames, providing police with the best evidence yet for identifying him. Detective Chun ran the stalker's image through facial recognition software and criminal databases, but initially found no matches. However, she also distributed the images to local businesses and community organizations, hoping that someone might recognize the individual and provide information about his identity. The break in the case came when a barista at the coffee shop where Emma had first spotted her stalker recognized the man in the police photos. The barista, whose name was Jake, remembered the customer because he had been asking questions about Emma during several recent visits to the shop. The man had claimed to be an old friend trying to reconnect with her and had asked about Emma's regular habits and schedule. Jake had been suspicious of the man's questions and had avoided providing specific information, but he confirmed that the individual had been observing the coffee shop during times when Emma might normally have been there. Jake also mentioned that the man had paid for his orders with cash and had never provided a name when ordering, which was unusual for their regular customer base. Detective Chun worked with Jake to review the coffee shop's security camera footage from the past several weeks. The recordings showed the stalker visiting the shop on multiple occasions, sometimes sitting for hours at a table near the window where he could observe the street. In several instances, the footage showed him following other customers who resembled Emma in general appearance, suggesting that he was actively searching for her when she varied her routine. The investigation expanded to include other local businesses where Emma was a regular customer. Detective Chun discovered that the stalker had visited Emma's usual grocery store, the bank where she conducted her financial business, and even the gas station where she typically filled up her car. In each location, he had attempted to gather information about Emma's habits and schedule. This pattern of behavior helped Detective Chun understand the full scope of the stalker's surveillance activities. He had been methodically mapping Emma's entire life, identifying her routines, and the people she interacted with regularly. The level of detail and persistence suggested that this was not a casual obsession but rather a carefully planned campaign of harassment and surveillance. Emma felt overwhelmed when she learned about the extent to which her life had been monitored and analyzed. Every place she had considered safe and private had been compromised by the stalker's presence. Dr. Mitchell helped Emma process these feelings and work on rebuilding her sense of security and privacy. The investigation team also discovered that the stalker had been using sophisticated techniques to avoid detection. He had purchased his surveillance equipment with cash from different stores to avoid creating a paper trail. He had also been careful to vary his own appearance and behavior to make it difficult for witnesses to provide consistent descriptions. Detective Chun suspected that the stalker had either professional training in surveillance techniques or had researched these methods extensively. This added another layer of concern to the case, as it suggested that he was intelligent and resourceful enough to adapt his tactics if he detected that law enforcement was closing in on him. Emma's case gained media attention when Detective Chun decided to release the stalker's photograph to local news outlets. The police hoped that someone in the community would recognize him and provide information about his identity or whereabouts. The story was covered by several local television stations and newspapers, bringing both additional tips and unwanted publicity to Emma's situation. The media coverage resulted in several potential leads, including tips from people who thought they had seen the stalker in various locations around the city. Detective Chun followed up on each report, gradually building a clearer picture of the stalker's movements and possible living situation. One particularly promising lead came from a property manager who recognized the stalker as someone who had inquired about rental apartments in several different neighborhoods over the past few months. The man had provided false identification during these inquiries, but the property manager remembered him because of his unusual questions about the other tenants and the security features of the buildings. Detective Chun theorized that the stalker might be someone who was relatively new to the area or who was deliberately avoiding establishing a permanent local address. This could explain why he hadn't been identified through normal channels and why his fingerprints weren't in any criminal databases. Emma had been staying with her cousin Rachel in Portland for 2 weeks when Detective Chun called with significant news. The investigation had finally yielded the stalker's identity through an unexpected source. A former co-worker of the stalker had seen his photograph on the news and contacted police with information that proved crucial to the case. The stalker's name was Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old former security consultant who had lost his job 6 months earlier due to inappropriate use of surveillance equipment. His former employer had discovered that Marcus had been using company resources to monitor individuals outside of his assigned cases, leading to his termination and the revocation of his security clearances. Detective Chun explained that Marcus had apparently become obsessed with Emma after seeing her at the library conference where he had been working as part of the security team. Conference records showed that Marcus had been assigned to monitor the event for potential security threats, but had instead focused his attention on photographing and tracking female attendees. The revelation that Marcus was a trained professional explained the sophisticated nature of his surveillance techniques and his ability to avoid detection for so long. Detective Chun had obtained warrants to search Marcus's apartment and vehicle, hoping to find additional evidence and determine the full extent of his stalking activities. Emma felt a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety upon learning Marcus's identity. While she was glad that police finally knew who had been terrorizing her, the knowledge that he was a professional with specialized training made him seem even more dangerous. Detective Chun assured Emma that they were taking every precaution to locate and apprehend Marcus quickly. The search of Marcus's apartment revealed a disturbing shrine dedicated to Emma. The walls were covered with photographs taken during his surveillance of her, including images captured through her apartment windows before the camera had been discovered. Marcus had also compiled detailed notes about Emma's daily routines, preferences, and personal relationships. Detective Chun found evidence that Marcus had been planning to escalate his contact with Emma. His apartment contained items that appeared to be intended as gifts, including jewelry and clothing in Emma's size. There were also handwritten letters expressing Marcus's belief that he and Emma were destined to be together, despite the fact that they had never actually met or spoken. Most disturbing was the discovery of detailed floor plans of Emma's apartment building and her workplace, along with notes about security vulnerabilities and optimal entry points. Marcus had clearly been planning some form of direct contact or confrontation, and his preparations suggested that he might not have intended to take no for an answer. The search also revealed that Emma was not Marcus's first victim. Police found evidence of previous stalking activities targeting at least 3 other women over the past 2 years. Detective Chun immediately contacted these other victims to inform them of Marcus's arrest warrant and to gather additional evidence for the prosecution. Emma learned that one of Marcus's previous victims had obtained a restraining order against him, but he had violated it repeatedly until she had been forced to relocate to another state. Another victim had filed multiple police reports about harassment and surveillance, but Marcus had been careful enough to avoid leaving sufficient evidence for criminal charges. The pattern revealed by these previous cases showed that Marcus typically selected women who lived alone and had predictable routines. He would conduct extensive surveillance before making any direct contact, often spending months learning about his targets' lives and relationships. His ultimate goal appeared to be engineering situations where he could present himself as a rescuer or helpful stranger, hoping to build a relationship based on manufactured circumstances. Detective Chun theorized that Marcus might have been planning to create some form of crisis or emergency that would allow him to intervene in Emma's life as a helpful presence. The items found in his apartment suggested that he had been preparing to approach Emma under the pretense of protecting her from some imagined threat, possibly even claiming that he had noticed suspicious activity around her building. The investigation team worked around the clock to locate Marcus, who had apparently fled his apartment after the media coverage of Emma's case began. His vehicle was found abandoned in a parking garage downtown, and Detective Chin suspected that he might have stolen another car or found alternative transportation to avoid detection. Emma remained in Portland while police searched for Marcus, but she found it difficult to feel safe even hundreds of miles away from where the stalking had occurred. Dr. Mitchell conducted phone sessions to help Emma cope with the ongoing stress and uncertainty. The knowledge that Marcus was still at large and potentially desperate made every shadow seem threatening. The breakthrough came when Marcus was spotted by alert citizens who recognized him from the media coverage. He had been seen at a bus station 2 hours from Emma's hometown, apparently attempting to purchase a ticket using cash and false identification. Police arrived at the station quickly, but Marcus had already boarded a bus headed toward Portland. Detective Chun immediately contacted Portland police and Emma to inform them that Marcus might be headed in their direction. Emma and Rachel were moved to a secure location while law enforcement coordinated efforts to intercept the bus before it reached the city. Marcus was arrested when the bus made a scheduled stop at a rest area about 50 miles outside of Portland. He was found to be carrying a backpack containing rope, duct tape, and a sedative drug that he had apparently stolen from a veterinary clinic. The implications of these items made Emma sick with fear about what Marcus might have been planning to do if he had reached her. During his arrest, Marcus was carrying a notebook containing Emma's current address in Portland, which he had apparently obtained through online research or by following someone from her family. Detective Chun realized that Marcus's surveillance capabilities and determination had been seriously underestimated, and that Emma would need ongoing protection even after his arrest. Emma testified via video conference during Marcus's arraignment, providing a victim impact statement that detailed the psychological trauma and disruption to her life caused by his stalking behavior. Marcus appeared disheveled and agitated during the proceedings, occasionally muttering comments that suggested he still believed his actions toward Emma had been justified expressions of love and protection. The judge denied Marcus's request for bail, citing the serious nature of the charges and the evidence of escalating behavior. Marcus was charged with stalking, harassment, breaking and entering, invasion of privacy, and attempted kidnapping based on the items he had been carrying when arrested. Emma's relief at Marcus's arrest was tempered by the realization that she would need to testify at his trial and potentially face him in person. Detective Chun assured Emma that the prosecution had a strong case and that measures would be taken to ensure her safety during any court proceedings. The psychological impact of the experience had fundamentally changed Emma's relationship with privacy and security. Even with Marcus in custody, she found herself constantly checking locks, varying routines, and feeling anxious in situations where she had previously felt comfortable. Dr. Mitchell helped Emma understand that recovery from this type of trauma would take time and patience. Emma decided not to return to her apartment in Maplewood, even though Marcus was no longer a threat. The space had been so thoroughly violated by his surveillance and intrusion that she couldn't imagine feeling safe there again. She worked with her landlord to terminate her lease and arranged for friends to pack up her belongings. The trial preparation process was lengthy and emotionally draining. Emma had to review hours of surveillance footage showing herself in her apartment, unaware that she was being watched. She also had to examine photographs from Marcus's collection and identify personal items that he had somehow obtained access to. Marcus's defense attorney attempted to portray his behavior as a misguided expression of romantic interest rather than criminal stalking. However, the evidence of his professional surveillance techniques, the violation of Emma's apartment, and the items he had been carrying when arrested made it clear that his intentions had been far more sinister than simple infatuation. During the trial, Emma learned additional disturbing details about Marcus's background. Expert witnesses testified that his behavior showed signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder and delusional thinking patterns. However, mental health professionals also confirmed that Marcus had been fully aware that his actions were illegal and harmful, making his condition an explanation rather than an excuse. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which Emma provided testimony about the impact of Marcus's stalking on her life and sense of security. She described the fear and anxiety that had consumed her daily existence, the career disruption caused by her need to take extended leave, and the ongoing therapy she required to address the trauma. Marcus was ultimately convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, with a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Emma or her family members. The judge noted that Marcus's professional training and sophisticated methods had made his stalking particularly invasive and threatening. Emma felt a sense of closure when the trial concluded, but she also recognized that the experience had changed her permanently. She had learned to be more aware of her surroundings and more protective of her personal information, lessons that would serve her well but also served as constant reminders of her vulnerability. Dr. Mitchell helped Emma work on rebuilding her sense of safety and autonomy in the months following the trial. They focused on strategies for managing ongoing anxiety while gradually returning to normal activities and relationships. Emma learned that healing from trauma was not a linear process, and that setbacks were normal parts of recovery. Emma eventually decided to start fresh in Portland, where she felt supported by Rachel and had begun to build new friendships and professional relationships. She found work at the Portland Public Library, where her experience and skills were valued, and where she felt she could rebuild her career without the constant reminders of the stalking experience. The transition to a new city and new life was challenging but ultimately empowering for Emma. She had survived an experience that could have destroyed her sense of security and autonomy, and she had emerged with new strength and self-awareness. While she would never forget the terror of being stalked, she refused to allow Marcus's actions to permanently define her life. Emma maintained contact with Detective Chun and the victim advocacy services in her former hometown, recognizing that her experience could be valuable in helping other stalking victims. She occasionally spoke at awareness events and training sessions, sharing her story to help law enforcement and community members better understand the impact of stalking crimes. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, Emma felt strong enough to begin dating again. She was careful about sharing personal information and maintained heightened awareness of her surroundings, but she refused to let fear prevent her from forming new relationships. Her experience had taught her to trust her instincts and to take any signs of inappropriate attention seriously. Emma's recovery was aided by the strong support network she had built in Portland, including Rachel, her new colleagues, and friends she had met through community activities. She learned that healing from trauma was often a collective effort that required the support and understanding of others. The experience had also given Emma a deeper appreciation for her own resilience and strength. She had faced an extremely frightening and dangerous situation and had survived with her core sense of self intact. While the stalking had changed her life in many ways, it had also revealed inner resources that she hadn't known she possessed. Emma continued to work with Dr. Mitchell on an occasional basis, recognizing that maintaining her mental health was an ongoing process rather than a destination. She had learned valuable skills for managing anxiety and stress that served her well in all areas of her life, not just in dealing with the aftermath of the stalking. As time passed, Emma found that she could think about the stalking experience with less emotional intensity. While she would never minimize the seriousness of what had happened to her, she had reached a point where the experience was part of her history rather than the defining feature of her present life. She had successfully reclaimed her sense of agency and autonomy, proving to herself that she was stronger than the circumstances that had threatened to overwhelm her. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Emma realized that she did recognize something familiar about the stalker's appearance in the security footage. She had a vague recollection of encountering someone who looked similar during a library conference she had attended several months earlier. Emma couldn't remember the specific details of the interaction, but she had the unsettling feeling that the stalker might have targeted her based on that initial meeting. Detective Chun arranged for Emma to review the conference attendance records and promotional materials to see if she could identify the stalker among the attendees. Emma spent several hours looking through photographs and name badges from the event, but couldn't make a definitive identification. However, the possibility that the stalking had begun that long ago was disturbing and suggested a level of premeditation that made the case even more serious. Emma's emotional state continued to fluctuate as the investigation progressed. She experienced periods of hope when new evidence emerged, followed by frustration and anxiety when leads didn't immediately result in an arrest. Dr. Mitchell helped Emma understand that this emotional roller coaster was normal and worked with her on maintaining stability while the case remained unresolved. The stalker seemed to be aware that law enforcement was actively investigating him, as his behavior became more erratic and less predictable. The security cameras at Emma's apartment building captured several instances of someone approaching the building, but leaving quickly when they noticed the surveillance equipment. Detective Chun interpreted this as evidence that the stalker was becoming more desperate and potentially more dangerous. Emma made the decision to take extended leave from her job and temporarily relocate to stay with a cousin in another state while the investigation continued. Detective Chun supported this decision, explaining that removing Emma from the stalker's immediate reach might force him to make mistakes that would lead to his capture. Emma felt conflicted about leaving her life behind, but she recognized that her safety had to be the top priority. Apartment building captured footage of a tall man attempting to enter the courtyard area late one evening. The timestamp showed that this occurred 3 nights after the locks had been changed, suggesting that the stalker was persistent and willing to adapt his methods. Officer Martinez showed Emma still images from the security footage, but the man's face was partially obscured by a hood and the angle of the camera. Emma couldn't definitively identify him, but something about his build and posture seemed familiar. She had the unsettling feeling that she might have encountered this person before, perhaps in a context that seemed completely innocent at the time. The investigation team expanded their efforts to include reviewing security footage from businesses near Emma's workplace and along her usual walking routes. They were looking for additional appearances of the same individual that might provide clearer images or help establish a pattern of behavior. Emma's temporary stay at Lisa's house was becoming more permanent as she struggled with the decision of whether to return to her apartment. The familiar comfort of her own space competed with the security and peace of mind she felt in her sister's home. The stalker had fundamentally changed her relationship with the place she had considered her sanctuary, and Emma wasn't sure if that feeling of safety could ever be restored.